Monday morning staff meeting at Hartwell Financial Services felt particularly tense as Director Brad Thompson stormed around our conference table during the quarterly review discussion. I sat quietly taking notes when he suddenly marched over to where I was working. Without warning, he poured his half-empty coffee cup directly onto my project files, spread across the polished mahogany surface. Hot coffee soaked through weeks of meticulous research as he sneered down at me. "Maybe this will wake you up, Michelle. Stop daydreaming and contribute something useful for once." The entire room fell completely silent. 12 colleagues stared in absolute shock. I calmly collected my dripping papers without saying a word and walked out. Driving home to my apartment that evening, I finally allowed myself to breathe properly for the first time since Brad's humiliating display. The coffee-stained documents sat in a plastic bag on my passenger seat, but they meant nothing compared to the evidence I had been secretly collecting for the past 3 months. What my colleagues at Hartwell Financial Services didn't know was that Michelle Chen wasn't my real identity. I was actually Senior Compliance Investigator Michelle Martinez from the Federal Banking Commission, and I had been living undercover as an entry-level financial analyst since early September. The assignment began in a sterile FBI Financial Crimes Division briefing room in downtown Chicago. Agent Patricia Wells, my handler, had spread Brad Thompson's file across a metal table like pieces of a complex puzzle. My credentials made me perfect for this particular investigation. Harvard MBA in financial forensics, certified fraud examiner, and 10 years of experience hunting corporate embezzlers who preyed on vulnerable populations. Brad Thompson has a pattern, Patricia had explained, pointing to a timeline spanning 5 years and 4 different cities: Phoenix, Denver, Atlanta, and now here in Chicago. Every time elderly clients lose their retirement savings through fake investment schemes. Every time an innocent employee takes the fall while Thompson disappears with a clean record and sterling recommendations. The suspected scheme was particularly cruel. Brad identified clients showing early signs of cognitive decline, then manipulated them into authorizing transfers to non-existent high-yield investment accounts. The money actually flowed through shell companies that Brad had created using stolen employee credentials. When auditors eventually arrived, all evidence pointed to the framed employee, never to Brad himself. My cover story was carefully constructed, recent college graduate struggling to establish herself in competitive financial services. I lived in a modest studio apartment near the office instead of my real home, drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic instead of my government vehicle, and wore discount clothing from outlet malls. Every detail reinforced the image of someone desperate to prove herself, someone Brad would see as weak and controllable. The past 3 months had been a masterclass in psychological endurance. Brad's treatment of me wasn't just professionally inappropriate. It was systematic degradation, designed to break down my confidence and isolate me from potential allies. He assigned impossible deadlines, then publicly criticized my failures. He scheduled meetings in different buildings at the same time, forcing me to sprint across campus and arrive breathless and disheveled. He questioned my basic competence in front of senior partners, making jokes about hiring standards these days. But every insult, every humiliation, every deliberate attempt to make me quit was actually moving us closer to building the case. I had installed nearly invisible recording devices throughout my workspace, capturing not just Brad's verbal abuse, but also his private phone conversations about moving money and manipulating client accounts. Hidden cameras documented his after-hours visits to other employees' offices, where he accessed computer systems using stolen passwords. The documentation system was sophisticated beyond anything Brad could imagine. Every piece of evidence was immediately encrypted and uploaded to secure FBI servers. My daily reports detailed not just financial irregularities, but also Brad's pattern of workplace harassment, which would strengthen the eventual case by demonstrating his willingness to break multiple categories of federal law. Today's incident with the coffee was actually perfect from an investigative standpoint. The hidden camera in my desk drawer captured the entire scene, including the shocked expressions of witnesses who could later testify about Brad's escalating inappropriate behavior. More importantly, his comfort level with public humiliation suggested he felt completely secure in his position, which meant he was likely to make mistakes. After reviewing the day's footage and filing my encrypted report, I called Patricia from my secure phone. "He's escalating," I told her. "I think we're close to a breakthrough. His confidence is making him sloppy. How much longer can you handle this, Michelle?" Patricia's concern was genuine. Undercover work took a psychological toll that couldn't be measured in case files and evidence reports. "However long it takes," I replied, thinking about the elderly clients whose life savings hung in the balance. These people trusted their retirement money to someone they believed would protect their futures. I can handle Brad Thompson's abuse if it means preventing him from destroying more innocent lives. What Brad didn't realize was that every time he tried to break me down, he was actually building the foundation for his own destruction. Tomorrow I would return to the office and continue playing the role of the struggling young analyst who couldn't fight back. But the evidence was mounting, and soon Brad Thompson would discover that sometimes the quietest person in the room is actually the most dangerous. Tuesday morning arrived gray and cold, matching the atmosphere inside Hartwell Financial Services. I arrived 30 minutes early, as I had done every day for 3 months, maintaining my cover as an eager but overwhelmed junior employee. The building was nearly empty, except for security guards and cleaning crews finishing their overnight shift. As I settled at my desk and activated the hidden recording equipment, I heard voices coming from Brad's corner office. He was already here, which was unusual. Brad typically arrived just before 9, timing his entrance for maximum visibility among staff and senior partners. Something had changed. Moving quietly down the hallway, I positioned myself near the office supply closet, where I could hear clearly without being seen. Brad was on the phone, his voice carrying a tension I had never heard before. "Phase 2 needs to happen this week," he was saying. "The Dorothy situation has to be moved to final stage by Friday. Everything's in place." My blood turned cold. Dorothy Palmer was the sweet, grandmother-like accountant who had shown me nothing but kindness since my first day at Hartwell. She was 67 years old, planning to retire next year to help care for her husband, who was battling early-stage dementia. Dorothy had shared photos of her grandchildren, brought me homemade cookies when I looked stressed, and offered gentle advice about navigating office politics. "Her signature problems are documented," Brad continued. "The authorization forms are already in her files. When the auditors come, they'll find everything they need to prosecute." I activated the recording device in my jacket pocket, capturing every word of what was clearly the final stages of Brad's scheme to frame Dorothy for his crimes. The elegance of his plan was becoming horrifyingly clear. Dorothy's computer credentials had been compromised for months, allowing Brad to authorize fraudulent transfers using her employee identification. He had been forging her signature on investment documents and planting them in her filing cabinets. When federal investigators eventually arrived, every piece of evidence would point directly to Dorothy Palmer. After Brad ended his call, I waited 20 minutes before returning to the main office area. Dorothy was just arriving, hanging her worn wool coat on the rack near her desk and humming softly to herself. She waved when she saw me, her face lighting up with the same grandmotherly warmth that had made these past months bearable. "Good morning, sweetie," Dorothy called. "You're here early again. That's dedication, but don't forget to take care of yourself, too." The irony was devastating. Here was a woman who genuinely cared about my well-being, while the man systematically destroying her life criticized my every move. Dorothy had no idea that her employee identification was being used to steal from the very clients she worked so carefully to serve. During my lunch break, I used maintenance access codes provided by the FBI to examine Dorothy's computer and filing systems. What I found made my stomach turn. Someone had planted dozens of forged investment authorization forms throughout her files, each bearing a carefully practiced version of her signature. Client account records showed Dorothy's employee ID authorizing suspicious transfers to shell companies that existed only on paper. Brad had studied Dorothy's handwriting, her computer passwords, and her daily routines for months. He knew exactly when she stepped away from her desk for coffee breaks, when she attended client meetings, and when she worked late to finish month-end reports. During those times, he had access to her computer, her files, and her signature stamp. Hidden camera footage from previous weeks showed Brad entering Dorothy's office after hours, sometimes staying for over an hour. He had been methodical, patient, and absolutely ruthless in setting up an innocent woman to take responsibility for his crimes. The scope of Brad's previous operations was even more disturbing. Research into his employment history revealed a pattern spanning 5 years and 4 states. In Phoenix, a 58-year-old accountant named Margaret Stevens had lost her house when prosecutors pursued charges related to missing client funds. In Denver, Robert Chen had been forced to delay cancer treatment because his legal defense costs drained his savings. In Atlanta, Sarah Williams couldn't afford her granddaughter's college tuition after being fired and blacklisted from financial services. Brad Thompson was a predator who destroyed innocent lives as collateral damage in his pursuit of stolen money. And Dorothy Palmer was about to become his next victim, unless I could gather enough evidence to stop him. That afternoon, Brad cornered me in the break room while I was refilling my water bottle. His mood had shifted again, becoming aggressively confrontational in a way that felt different from his usual condescending harassment. "You know Michelle?" he said, positioning himself between me and the exit. "I've been watching you very carefully lately. You ask a lot of questions for someone in your position. You spend a lot of time near other people's workstations. That makes me wonder what you're really doing here." My heart rate spiked, but my training kicked in immediately. Maintaining cover meant showing exactly the kind of nervous reaction that Brad would expect from a genuinely intimidated junior employee. "I'm just trying to learn everything I can," I replied, allowing a slight tremor in my voice. "I know I make mistakes, and I want to improve." Brad stepped closer, using his height and position to create physical intimidation. "Mistakes?" He laughed harshly. "You're beyond mistakes, Michelle. You're pathetic. I'm documenting every single error you make, every missed deadline, every sign that you don't belong in this business. Do you understand what that means?" "I understand," I said quietly, keeping my eyes down in apparent submission. "Good." Brad smiled coldly. "Because some people just aren't cut out for financial services. Some people need to find other career paths before they embarrass themselves further." As he walked away, I realized that Brad's suspicion about my behavior could actually accelerate his timeline. If he felt threatened, he might move against Dorothy even sooner than Friday. I needed to contact Patricia immediately. That evening, I called my handler from a secure location 3 blocks from my apartment building. "Brad's getting paranoid," I reported. "He suspects I'm not who I claim to be, and he's planning to finalize the frame-up of Dorothy Palmer by Friday. We need to move faster." Patricia's response was swift. "We'll have the audit team ready by Thursday morning. Can you hold your cover for 48 more hours?" "I can hold it," I assured her, thinking about Dorothy's grandchildren and the photos on her desk. "But Patricia, when this goes down, I want Brad to know exactly who he's been underestimating. I want him to understand that every time he tried to humiliate me, he was actually building the case that's going to destroy him. You'll get your chance, Michelle. Just remember the mission comes first. Don't let personal satisfaction compromise the investigation." But as I hung up the phone, I knew that justice for Dorothy Palmer and vindication for myself had become the same goal. Brad Thompson was about to learn that sometimes the quietest person in the room is gathering the loudest evidence. Wednesday evening, the Hartwell Financial Services building stood nearly empty as custodial crews moved through the offices with their industrial vacuum cleaners and disinfectant sprays. I had volunteered to work late on quarterly reports, a dedication that fit perfectly with my cover identity as an ambitious junior analyst trying to prove herself. What my colleagues didn't know was that I had spent the past 2 weeks studying the custodial schedule's security camera positions and after-hours access protocols. Tonight, I would finally gain access to Brad's private office and the evidence that would complete our case against him. At 8:30, I changed into a custodial uniform provided by the FBI and began moving through the executive corridor with a commercial cleaning cart. Brad's office was located in the northeast corner of the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago River and a mahogany door that projected authority and success. The lock was electronic, but my handler Patricia had provided override codes obtained through federal warrant. As the door clicked open, I felt a rush of adrenaline mixed with profound anger. This was the office where Brad had planned the destruction of Dorothy Palmer's life, where he had orchestrated the theft of retirement savings from dozens of elderly clients. The office was exactly what I expected from someone with Brad's arrogance and narcissism. Awards and commendations covered one entire wall. Photographs showed him shaking hands with senior executives, and motivational quotes about success were prominently displayed. But behind the impressive facade, I was looking for evidence of systematic financial fraud. Brad's desk contained the usual professional materials, but I was after something much more valuable. According to our intelligence, he maintained detailed records of his criminal operations in a secure location within the office. After 30 minutes of careful searching, I found what I was looking for behind a framed diploma on the wall near his computer. The hidden safe was small but sophisticated, requiring both a numeric combination and biometric scanner. Fortunately, Brad's arrogance had made him predictable. The combination was his birthday, a detail the FBI had obtained from employment records. The biometric scanner was more challenging, but I had come prepared with advanced equipment designed specifically for bypassing such security measures. Inside the safe, I discovered an external hard drive containing encrypted files dating back 5 years. This was the holy grail of evidence, the detailed documentation of Brad's complete criminal enterprise across multiple states and dozens of victims. The files revealed the full scope of his operations with horrifying clarity. In Phoenix, he had targeted 32 elderly clients, stealing over $1.6 million before framing accountant Margaret Stevens for embezzlement. The investigation that followed destroyed Margaret's career, her reputation, and her financial stability. She lost her house, her retirement savings, and her ability to find work in financial services. Denver showed a similar pattern with even larger numbers. 41 clients, $2.3 million stolen, and Robert Chen taking the fall. Robert's legal defense costs and lost income forced him to delay cancer treatment for 8 months, while Brad moved on to a new city with glowing recommendations from senior management who never suspected his involvement. Atlanta represented the refinement of Brad's technique. 53 clients, $3.7 million stolen, and Sarah Williams destroyed in the process. By this point, Brad had perfected his method of identifying vulnerable employees, manipulating client accounts, and disappearing before anyone could connect him to the crimes. Here in Chicago, the current operation involved 37 clients from Hartwell Financial Services, with total stolen amounts already exceeding $2.3 million. But the most devastating discovery was Brad's detailed plan to frame Dorothy Palmer, complete with timelines, evidence placement schedules, and predictions about how the investigation would unfold. The files contained personal information about Dorothy that made my hands shake with rage. Brad had researched her husband's medical condition, her financial struggles, and her grandchildren's college plans. He knew that the criminal charges would destroy not just Dorothy's career, but her ability to help her family through difficult times. He simply didn't care. Among the digital files, I found email correspondence between Brad and a lawyer named Jackson Reed, who served as his accomplice in creating shell companies and laundering stolen money. Their communications revealed the cold, calculating nature of their partnership. They discussed elderly clients like merchandise, evaluating their vulnerability, and the potential profit from manipulating their accounts. One email particularly stood out. The Palmer woman is perfect for final phase, trusting, detail-oriented but not sophisticated enough to understand modern fraud techniques. When investigators review her computer access logs, they'll find everything they need for prosecution. I photographed every document, uploaded every file to the secure FBI server, and documented the safe's contents with meticulous detail. This evidence would not only convict Brad and Jackson, but also provide the documentation needed to recover stolen funds and compensate the victims whose lives they had destroyed. As I prepared to leave Brad's office, I heard footsteps in the corridor outside. The security guard was making his 11 o'clock rounds, which meant I had miscalculated the timing. Moving quickly but quietly, I gathered my equipment and closed the safe, ensuring that everything appeared exactly as I had found it. The footsteps paused outside Brad's office, and I heard the distinctive sound of keys rattling. The security guard was checking each office door to ensure they were properly secured. I had perhaps 30 seconds to find a hiding place before he entered the room. The supply closet in the corner of Brad's office was barely large enough for cleaning supplies, but it would have to work. I squeezed inside just as the door opened and fluorescent lights illuminated the room. Through the crack in the closet door, I watched the security guard conduct his routine inspection, checking windows, examining the desk area, and testing the lock on Brad's filing cabinet. For 2 hours, I remained motionless in that cramped space, waiting for the building to return to complete silence. The discomfort was nothing compared to the satisfaction of knowing that Brad Thompson's criminal career was about to end. Every piece of evidence we needed was now in federal hands, documented and verified beyond any reasonable doubt. When I finally emerged from the building, I immediately called Patricia from my secure phone. "I have everything," I told her. "Complete records, victim lists, communication with accomplices, and detailed plans to frame Dorothy Palmer. But Patricia, he's moving Friday morning. We have less than 36 hours before Dorothy's life is destroyed forever." Patricia's response was decisive. "The audit team will be there at 9 a.m. sharp. Michelle, you've done incredible work on this case. Tomorrow you'll get to see Brad Thompson realize that he picked the wrong person to underestimate." As I drove home through the empty Chicago streets, I thought about all the victims whose stories were contained on that hard drive. Margaret Stevens, Robert Chen, Sarah Williams, and dozens of others who had trusted their retirement savings to someone they believed would protect their financial security. Tomorrow, their story would finally have the ending it deserved. Brad Thompson had built his criminal empire on the assumption that he was smarter than everyone around him, that he could manipulate and discard people without consequence. He was about to learn that justice sometimes comes from the most unexpected places, delivered by someone he had dismissed as weak and insignificant. Thursday morning brought dark clouds and intermittent rain to downtown Chicago, creating the perfect atmosphere for what would be my final day as Michelle Chen's struggling financial analyst. Patricia had confirmed that the federal audit team would arrive at Hartwell Financial Services at exactly 9 a.m. on Friday, giving me 24 hours to maintain my cover while secretly coordinating the operation that would bring down Brad Thompson. The office felt different as I walked through the main entrance at my usual time of 7:45. Everything looked the same. The marble floors polished to mirror brightness, the corporate logo gleaming behind the reception desk, colleagues arriving with their morning coffee, and quiet conversations about weekend plans. But underneath the routine normalcy, I could feel the tension of an investigation reaching its climax. Brad's behavior had become increasingly erratic over the past week, swinging between aggressive confrontation and paranoid suspicion. This morning, he seemed determined to escalate his psychological warfare against me to unprecedented levels. During the 8:30 staff meeting, Brad announced a surprise presentation assignment. "Michelle," he said with a smile that never reached his eyes, "I want you to present the quarterly client portfolio analysis to our senior partners this afternoon, 2 o'clock sharp." A murmur ran through the conference room. Everyone knew that portfolio analysis presentations were typically prepared weeks in advance by senior analysts working with specialized software and detailed market research. Asking a junior employee to prepare such a presentation in 6 hours was either a setup for failure or a test of impossible proportions. "I don't have access to the portfolio analysis data," I replied, maintaining the persona of someone trying to be cooperative despite unreasonable demands. "That's your problem to solve." Brad shrugged. "Professional development requires taking initiative. Figure it out." For the next 4 hours, I made a genuine attempt to compile portfolio information from publicly available sources, knowing that the presentation would be inadequate, but needing to maintain the appearance of someone desperately trying to meet Brad's impossible expectations. This was part of the performance, the final act in a 3-month production that would end tomorrow morning. At 2 o'clock, I stood in the executive conference room facing 5 senior partners who had no idea they were witnessing the conclusion of a federal investigation. Brad sat at the far end of the polished conference table, his expression combining anticipation and satisfaction as he prepared to watch me fail publicly. My presentation lasted exactly 7 minutes before Brad interrupted. "This is exactly why some people don't belong in financial services," he announced to the senior partners. "Michelle, you've just demonstrated a complete lack of understanding about basic portfolio management principles. This is embarrassing for our entire department." The senior partners exchanged uncomfortable glances. Even they seemed to recognize that Brad's behavior was crossing professional boundaries. But I remained in character, showing the kind of humiliation and defeat that Brad expected to see. After the meeting, Brad's aggression reached new heights. During lunch, he deliberately spilled black ink across my white blouse while I was presenting client paperwork to visiting investors. The stains spread across the front of my shirt, making me look disheveled and unprofessional in front of people who could potentially influence my career. "Oh, how clumsy of me," Brad said with mock concern. "You might want to keep some spare clothes at the office, Michelle. Professional appearance matters in this business." The afternoon brought a series of deliberately impossible tasks. Brad scheduled back-to-back meetings in buildings located on opposite sides of downtown Chicago, forcing me to sprint through city streets in high heels and arrive breathless and apologetic to each appointment. He assigned reports that required access to databases I hadn't been given permission to use, then criticized my incomplete work in front of colleagues who were beginning to look genuinely uncomfortable with his behavior. But the most heartbreaking moment came when Dorothy Palmer approached me privately near the end of the workday. She looked worried, her usually cheerful demeanor replaced by confusion and concern. "Honey," Dorothy said softly, "I need to tell you something strange. There have been problems with my computer access lately. Files I don't remember creating, account activities I don't remember authorizing. I'm starting to worry that someone might be using my credentials inappropriately." My heart broke as I looked into Dorothy's trusting eyes. She was beginning to suspect that something was wrong, but she had no idea how extensive Brad's manipulation had become, or how close she was to being arrested for crimes she didn't commit. I wanted desperately to warn her to explain everything and tell her to contact a lawyer immediately, but revealing the truth would compromise the entire investigation and potentially allow Brad to destroy evidence or flee before we could arrest him. "Maybe you should mention it to IT security," I suggested gently, knowing that by tomorrow morning federal agents would be explaining everything to her. "I think I will," Dorothy nodded. "You know, Michelle, I've been watching how Brad treats you. That's not acceptable behavior from a supervisor. Have you considered filing a complaint with Human Resources?" The irony was devastating. Dorothy was trying to protect me from workplace harassment while I was working to save her from federal prosecution. "I can handle Brad," I told her. "But thank you for caring." At 4:30, Brad called me into his office for what he clearly intended as a final confrontation. His desk was covered with printed emails, performance evaluations, and attendance records that he had apparently been compiling for weeks. "Sit down, Michelle," he ordered, gesturing to the chair facing his desk. "We need to discuss your future with this company." I sat down, maintaining the posture of someone who knew she was about to be fired, but was trying to appear professional and cooperative. "I'm recommending your immediate termination," Brad announced with obvious satisfaction. "Your performance has been consistently substandard. Your attitude has been problematic, and frankly, I don't think you have what it takes to succeed in financial services." Patricia had coached me on this scenario. If Brad attempted to fire me, I should sign whatever documents he provided and agree to whatever terms he demanded. A wrongful termination lawsuit could be handled later, but maintaining cover until tomorrow morning was essential. Brad slid a resignation letter across his desk. The document was clearly pre-written, stating that I was voluntarily leaving Hartwell Financial Services due to personal recognition that I was not suited for the financial industry. "Sign this," he commanded, "and we can process your departure quietly. Refuse to sign, and I'll make sure that every financial services company in Chicago knows about your incompetence." I signed the letter with shaking hands, allowing my fear and humiliation to show. This was what Brad wanted to see: complete defeat, total submission, the destruction of someone he had identified as weak and vulnerable. "Clean out your desk tonight," Brad ordered. "Security will escort you from the building tomorrow morning. Don't even think about applying for unemployment benefits or asking for references. Your career in finance is over." As I left his office carrying the signed resignation letter that would become evidence in his federal prosecution, I felt a mixture of rage and anticipation. Tomorrow morning, Brad Thompson would discover that sometimes the quietest person in the room has been gathering the loudest evidence. That evening, I met Patricia at a secure location 6 blocks from my apartment. She reviewed the signed resignation letter, the hidden camera footage from today's harassment, and the final pieces of evidence that would complete our case against Brad. "He really believes he's destroyed you," Patricia observed, studying the resignation letter. "His arrogance is going to make tomorrow's revelation even more satisfying." "What time should I arrive at the office?" I asked. 8:45, just like every other day. Maintain your cover until the moment we identify you as Senior Investigator Martinez. Brad Thompson needs to be completely blindsided by this." As I drove home through the Chicago streets, for what I thought might be the last time, as Michelle Chen, I reflected on the psychological toll of the past 3 months. Living as someone else, accepting abuse and humiliation, watching innocent people like Dorothy Palmer being manipulated and destroyed, had required every bit of my professional training and personal resilience. But tomorrow morning, justice would finally be served. Brad Thompson's victims would see their stolen money recovered. Dorothy Palmer would be cleared of all suspicion, and I would have the satisfaction of watching a predator realize that he had underestimated the wrong person. The performance was almost over. Now came the finale. Friday morning arrived crisp and clear with autumn sunlight streaming through the windows of Hartwell Financial Services as I walked through the front entrance for what Brad Thompson believed would be my final day. I carried myself with the same defeated posture I had maintained for 3 months, showing no sign that today would bring the most dramatic reversal in my professional career. Brad was already at his desk reviewing documents with the satisfied expression of someone who believed he had successfully eliminated a potential threat. When he saw me approaching my workstation, his smile became predatory and triumphant. "Michelle," he called across the office space loud enough for everyone to hear, "I thought we agreed that you would clear out your personal items and leave quietly. Security will be here at 9 to escort you from the building after our morning meeting." I nodded submissively, maintaining the character of someone who had accepted defeat. "I just need to collect a few things from my desk," I replied softly. Around the office, colleagues were beginning their daily routines with the uncomfortable awareness that they were witnessing the aftermath of whatever had transpired between Brad and me yesterday. Some avoided eye contact, others watched with curiosity, but everyone seemed to understand that something significant was happening. At 8:55, 4 official-looking people in dark business attire entered through the main reception area. They carried briefcases and had the unmistakable bearing of government investigators. Brad noticed them immediately, but his reaction was confidence rather than concern. "Federal Banking Commission audit team," the lead investigator announced to the receptionist. "We're here regarding irregularities in client retirement account management. We need to speak with senior staff immediately." Brad practically leaped from his chair, straightening his tie and assuming the role of helpful cooperative department director. This was exactly what he had been expecting and preparing for. In his mind, these investigators were here to discover the evidence he had carefully planted in Dorothy Palmer's files and computer systems. "Welcome to Hartwell Financial Services," Brad said, approaching the audit team with professional enthusiasm. "I'm Director Brad Thompson. I assume you're here about the concerns I've been documenting regarding irregular account activities." The lead auditor consulted his tablet computer. "Mr. Thompson, yes. We understand there have been issues with unauthorized account transfers and questionable investment authorizations." "Absolutely," Brad replied, his voice filled with what sounded like genuine concern for client welfare. "I've been monitoring the situation carefully, and I believe the problems originate from Dorothy Palmer's workstation. Poor Dorothy has been with us for years, but lately her judgment and attention to detail have been concerning." Brad gestured toward Dorothy's office, where she was just settling in for the day, completely unaware that she was about to be accused of federal crimes. "I have computer access logs, signature samples, and documented instances of irregular account activities. Everything points to Dorothy's involvement in unauthorized client fund transfers." The auditors exchanged glances that Brad interpreted as professional interest in his evidence. What he didn't realize was that these were FBI agents who had already reviewed every detail of his criminal operation and were here to arrest him, not Dorothy Palmer. "Mr. Thompson," the lead agent said carefully, "we'll definitely want to review all your documentation. But first we need to speak with someone specific. We're looking for Senior Investigator Martinez." Brad's confident expression faltered slightly. "Martinez, I'm sorry, but we don't have anyone by that name on our staff. Perhaps you're thinking of a different office." At that moment, Agent Patricia Wells entered through the side entrance that led directly from the parking garage to the executive offices. She moved with the purposeful stride of someone who had been planning this moment for months. Brad glanced at her, but showed no recognition. He had never seen Patricia before and had no reason to connect her arrival with the audit team. Patricia walked directly toward my desk, where I was still maintaining the pretense of collecting personal belongings. The entire office had fallen silent, with employees sensing that something unprecedented was happening, but not understanding exactly what. "Mr. Thompson," Patricia said in a clear, authoritative voice that carried across the entire office space, "we need to speak with Senior Investigator Martinez immediately." Brad looked genuinely confused. "I'm sorry, but I've already explained that we don't have anyone named Martinez working here. Are you certain you have the correct location?" Patricia stopped directly in front of my desk and looked down at me with the slight smile of someone who had been waiting months for this particular moment. "Investigator Martinez," she said formally, "are you ready to proceed with the arrest phase of this operation?" The transformation began slowly as I straightened in my chair and removed the cheap, oversized glasses that had been part of my disguise for 3 months. I reached into the hidden compartment of my desk drawer and withdrew my federal identification badge, holding it up for everyone in the office to see clearly. "Agent Patricia Wells, Federal Banking Commission," I said in my real voice, which carried none of the uncertainty and hesitation that had characterized Michelle Chen's speech patterns. "I'm Senior Compliance Investigator Michelle Martinez, and I've been conducting an undercover investigation of financial fraud at this location for the past 93 days. The office erupted in gasps and shocked exclamations as colleagues who had known me as a struggling junior analyst realized they had been watching a federal law enforcement operation unfold before their eyes. But the most dramatic reaction came from Brad Thompson himself. His face went through a remarkable transformation, cycling from confusion to disbelief to dawning horror as the implications became clear. The woman he had humiliated, harassed, and attempted to fire was actually a federal investigator who had been documenting his crimes for 3 months. "Michelle," he stammered, his voice barely audible. "What is this? What's happening here?" Patricia stepped forward with handcuffs already in her hands. "Mr. Thompson, you are under arrest for federal charges including embezzlement, wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to defraud elderly clients of their retirement savings." At that moment, additional FBI agents entered the building from multiple entrances, moving with coordinated precision. One team headed directly for the parking garage where Jackson Reed, Brad's lawyer accomplice, was being arrested, as he arrived for what he thought would be a routine meeting to destroy evidence. Dorothy Palmer emerged from her office, drawn by the commotion, and stood frozen in the doorway as she tried to process what was happening. Her face showed confusion, fear, and the beginning realization that the computer problems she had mentioned to me yesterday were connected to something much larger and more serious. I walked over to Dorothy and gently took her hands. "Mrs. Palmer," I said softly, "you're not in any trouble. Mr. Thompson has been using your computer credentials to authorize fraudulent transactions, but you're the victim here, not the perpetrator. The FBI has evidence proving your innocence." Dorothy's eyes filled with tears of relief and gratitude. "You mean, all those files I didn't remember creating all those account activities? That was him." "All of it," I confirmed. "We have video footage, computer records, and financial documentation proving that Mr. Thompson systematically stole your identity to cover his embezzlement of client retirement funds." Behind us, Brad was standing in the center of the office with his hands cuffed behind his back, staring at me with the expression of someone whose entire worldview had just collapsed. The woman he had treated as insignificant and powerless had actually been orchestrating his downfall from the very beginning. "You recorded everything," he said, his voice hollow with disbelief. "Every conversation, every meeting. You've been building a case against me this whole time." I met his eyes directly for the first time in 3 months, letting him see the intelligence and determination that I had been hiding beneath the facade of Michelle Chen. "Mr. Thompson," I said clearly, "you spent 3 months trying to break me down, humiliate me, and force me to quit. What you actually did was provide the FBI with documented evidence of your pattern of workplace harassment, your willingness to abuse vulnerable employees, and your complete lack of empathy for the people whose lives you were destroying." The senior partners of Hartwell Financial Services had gathered near the conference room, watching in stunned silence as their star director was arrested by federal agents in front of the entire staff. The morning that had begun as a routine Friday was becoming a day that everyone in the office would remember for the rest of their careers. Patricia approached with additional documentation. "Mr. Thompson, we also have a federal warrant for your computer systems, filing cabinets, and personal office safe. Everything you used to plan and execute this fraud operation is now evidence in your federal prosecution." As the reality of his situation sank in, Brad made one final attempt to maintain his authority and control. "This is entrapment," he shouted loud enough for everyone in the building to hear. "You people have no idea who you're dealing with. My connections will have this investigation shut down before you can file charges." I smiled for the first time since this operation began. "Mr. Thompson," I replied calmly, "your connections can't help you when you've been recorded admitting to multiple federal crimes, when we have documented evidence of fraud spanning 5 years and 4 states. And when we can prove that you've stolen over $8 million from elderly clients who trusted you with their retirement security. The transformation was complete. Michelle Chen, the struggling junior analyst who couldn't fight back, had been revealed as senior investigator Michelle Martinez, the federal agent who had been gathering evidence to bring down a sophisticated criminal operation. Justice was finally beginning. The FBI tactical team moved through Hartwell Financial Services with military precision, securing evidence and ensuring that no documentation could be destroyed or hidden. Jackson Reed, Brad's lawyer accomplice, was escorted through the main entrance in handcuffs, his expensive suit and confident demeanor completely undermined by the federal agents flanking him on both sides. When Brad saw Jackson being led past the conference room windows, the last vestiges of his arrogance finally crumbled. His scheme had depended on Jackson's legal expertise to create shell companies, launder stolen money, and provide protection if investigations ever came too close. Now his partner was in custody, and Brad realized that his entire criminal network was being dismantled in real time. "This is a setup," Brad shouted, desperately struggling against the handcuffs as he was positioned near the elevator bank. "You can't prove anything. This is all circumstantial evidence." I walked over to my desk and opened the bottom drawer, revealing sophisticated recording equipment that had been hidden there for the past 3 months. Patricia connected the device to her laptop computer, and Brad's voice filled the office space through speakers that had been set up by the technical team. "Phase 2 needs to happen this week. The Dorothy situation has to be moved to final stage by Friday. Everything's in place." The recording continued with Brad's detailed discussion of framing Dorothy Palmer, his casual dismissal of client welfare, and his coordination with Jackson Reed to destroy evidence and escape prosecution. As his own words played back for everyone in the office to hear, Brad's face went pale with the realization that every private conversation, every criminal plan, every moment of confidence had been captured and preserved. 3 months of audio surveillance, Patricia announced to the assembled staff, video documentation, computer access logs, financial transaction records, and witness testimony from multiple states. "Mr. Thompson, you've provided us with enough evidence to prosecute you for crimes spanning 5 years and involving over 200 victims." I addressed the entire office, speaking in my real voice with the authority and competence that I had been forced to hide for months. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Senior Compliance Investigator Michelle Martinez with the Federal Banking Commission. For the past 93 days, I've been conducting an undercover investigation into systematic embezzlement, elder financial abuse, and identity theft orchestrated by Director Brad Thompson." A murmur of amazement ran through the crowd of employees who were still processing the revelation that their struggling junior colleague was actually a federal law enforcement officer. Sarah from accounting spoke up first. "You mean all those times Brad was so horrible to you? You were actually investigating him. Every incident of harassment, every attempt at intimidation, every effort to force me to resign was documented and preserved as evidence," I confirmed. "Mr. Thompson's treatment of employees demonstrates a pattern of abuse that supported his criminal operations by ensuring that potential witnesses were too intimidated to report suspicious activities." Senior partner William Harrison stepped forward, his expression combining shock with professional concern about the implications for Hartwell Financial Services. "Investigator Martinez, what can you tell us about the scope of this investigation and the impact on our client accounts?" Patricia opened her evidence folders and began presenting the findings that would reshape everyone's understanding of Brad's position within the company. Mr. Thompson used his access to client retirement accounts to transfer funds to shell companies that he created using stolen employee identities. The total amount stolen from Hartwell clients exceeds $2.3 million, affecting 37 individual retirement accounts. Dorothy Palmer, who had been listening with growing horror, raised her trembling hand. "My computer credentials, my signature on those documents. He was setting me up to take the blame for everything." "Mrs. Palmer," I said gently, "we have video evidence of Mr. Thompson accessing your computer after hours, forging your signature on authorization documents, and planting fraudulent files in your workspace. You were never a suspect in this investigation. You were always a victim." The emotional weight of Dorothy's near destruction was visible on the faces of everyone who knew her. She had worked at Hartwell for 15 years, building relationships with clients and colleagues based on trust and dedication. Brad's plan would have not only sent her to federal prison, but also destroyed the financial security she needed to care for her husband and help her grandchildren with college expenses. Brad made one more desperate attempt to shift blame and maintain some shred of dignity. "You don't understand the pressure of managing these accounts," he said, addressing the senior partners as if they were still his professional colleagues. "The market volatility the client demands the impossible performance expectations. Sometimes difficult decisions have to be made. I had been waiting for this moment for 3 months." "Mr. Thompson," I said clearly, "difficult decisions don't include stealing the retirement savings of elderly clients who trusted you with their financial security. They don't include framing innocent employees for crimes they didn't commit. And they certainly don't include creating fake investment opportunities to fund your personal lifestyle while your victims postpone medical treatments and lose their homes." Patricia presented additional evidence that demonstrated the full scope of Brad's criminal history across multiple states. Margaret Stevens in Phoenix lost her house and her career. Robert Chen in Denver delayed cancer treatment for 8 months because legal defense costs drained his savings. Sarah Williams in Atlanta couldn't afford her granddaughter's college tuition and was blacklisted from financial services employment. The pattern was undeniable. Brad Thompson was a predator who moved from city to city destroying innocent lives while enriching himself through elaborate schemes that targeted the most vulnerable populations. His victims weren't just the elderly clients whose money he stole. They were also the employees he framed and the colleagues he intimidated into silence. FBI forensic accountant David Kim approached with preliminary recovery projections. "Based on our asset seizure operations this morning, we expect to recover approximately 97% of the stolen client funds. Mr. Thompson's personal accounts, real estate holdings, and investment portfolios are being frozen and liquidated to provide restitution for his victims." This news brought the first genuine smiles to the faces of Hartwell employees who had been watching their workplace transformed into a crime scene. The clients whose retirement accounts had been compromised would recover their life savings. Dorothy Palmer's reputation and career would be restored, and the investigation would prevent Brad from moving to another city and destroying more innocent lives. Client Margaret Henderson, a 78-year-old retired teacher, arrived at the office in response to FBI notification about the recovery of her stolen retirement funds. She confronted Brad directly, her voice shaking with emotion and righteous anger. "You told me my money was invested in safe government bonds," she said, standing as close to Brad as the federal agents would allow. "You showed me fake statements every quarter assuring me that my retirement was secure. I trusted you with everything I had worked for during 43 years of teaching children." Brad's response revealed the complete absence of empathy that had enabled his criminal career. "Mrs. Henderson, you don't understand the complexities of modern portfolio management. Sometimes aggressive strategies are necessary to achieve optimal returns." "Aggressive strategies?" Margaret's voice rose with indignation. "You mean stealing? You mean lying to elderly people who trusted you with their life savings?" The confrontation between victim and predator provided a moment of clarity for everyone witnessing the arrest. This wasn't about complicated financial strategies or market pressures. This was about a man who chose to steal from vulnerable people because he believed he was smart enough to get away with it and powerful enough to destroy anyone who tried to stop him. FBI evidence specialist Jennifer Walsh presented the computer equipment and files that had been seized from Brad's office safe. Mr. Thompson maintained detailed records of his criminal operations, including victim profiles, asset transfer schedules, and communication with his accomplice Jackson Reed. His own documentation will be used as primary evidence in his federal prosecution. As Brad was prepared for transport to federal custody, he made one final attempt to intimidate me, falling back on the same psychological tactics that had defined our professional relationship for 3 months. "You think you've won something here, Michelle?" he said, using my cover name with obvious contempt. "You have no idea what kind of enemies you've made or how this will affect your career. People with real power don't forget, and they don't forgive." I looked at him directly, letting him see the confidence and competence that I had hidden for so long. "Mr. Thompson," I replied calmly, "my real name is Senior Investigator Michelle Martinez. I have a Harvard MBA in financial forensics, 10 years of experience investigating corporate fraud, and a 100% conviction rate for cases I've brought to federal prosecution. The only thing I've won today is justice for your victims and the satisfaction of watching a predator face consequences for his actions." As federal agents led Brad Thompson toward the elevator that would take him to the beginning of a federal prosecution, I turned to address my colleagues one final time as their true identities and mine were finally revealed. For the past 3 months, you've watched someone you believe to be a struggling junior employee face constant harassment and professional sabotage, I said. What you were actually witnessing was a federal investigation that will prevent this man from destroying any more innocent lives. Dorothy Palmer approached me with tears in her eyes and gratitude in her voice. Michelle, Investigator Martinez, you saved my life. If he had succeeded in framing me, my husband and I would have lost everything. Mrs. Palmer, I replied, preventing that outcome was exactly why this investigation was necessary. No one should have their life destroyed by someone they trusted to protect their financial security. The truth had been unveiled, justice was being served, and Brad Thompson's criminal career was finally over. But the most satisfying part was knowing that his victims would recover their stolen money and rebuild their lives while he faced the consequences of underestimating the wrong person. 2 months later, I sat in the witness chair of Federal District Court in downtown Chicago, facing Judge Patricia Morrison as she prepared to deliver Brad Thompson's sentence. The courtroom was packed with victims, FBI agents, and journalists covering what had become one of the largest elder fraud cases in Illinois history. Brad sat at the defendant's table between 2 public defenders, his expensive suits replaced by standard Orange County jail attire. The confident, arrogant executive who had terrorized employees and stolen from elderly clients was now a convicted felon awaiting punishment for crimes that had destroyed dozens of lives across multiple states. Mr. Thompson, Judge Morrison said, reviewing the sentencing documentation, you have been found guilty of 47 counts of wire fraud, 32 counts of elder financial abuse, 18 counts of identity theft, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. The evidence presented during this trial demonstrates a pattern of criminal behavior spanning 5 years and resulting in the theft of over $8.2 million from vulnerable victims. During my testimony, I had detailed every aspect of the undercover investigation, from the initial briefing with Agent Patricia Wells to the moment when Brad's true nature was revealed in front of his colleagues. The jury had listened with rapt attention as I described his systematic harassment, his elaborate framing of Dorothy Palmer, and his complete lack of empathy for the people whose retirement savings he had stolen. The defendant's treatment of Investigator Martinez during her undercover assignment, the judge continued, demonstrates a willingness to abuse and intimidate anyone he perceived as vulnerable or threatening to his criminal operations. This behavior shows a fundamental disrespect for human dignity that goes far beyond financial crimes. Jackson Reed had already been sentenced to 8 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to conspiracy and money laundering charges. His cooperation with federal prosecutors had provided additional evidence about Brad's operations in previous cities, leading to charges being filed in Arizona, Colorado, and Georgia. Judge Morrison turned to address Brad directly. Mr. Thompson, your crimes have caused immeasurable harm to elderly victims who trusted you with their life savings. Margaret Henderson lost her house. Robert Chen delayed cancer treatment. Sarah Williams couldn't afford her granddaughter's education. Dorothy Palmer nearly faced federal prosecution for crimes you committed using her stolen identity. The victim impact statements had been particularly powerful. Margaret Henderson, now 79, had testified about the emotional devastation of learning that her retirement security was an illusion created by someone she had trusted. Robert Chen described the terror of facing cancer diagnosis, while unsure whether he could afford treatment due to legal expenses from fighting false charges. Sarah Williams spoke about her granddaughter's confusion when college plans suddenly became impossible due to financial constraints that didn't exist until Brad destroyed her grandmother's career. The court sentences you to 12 years in federal prison, Judge Morrison announced, with supervised release for 5 years following incarceration. You are ordered to pay complete restitution to all victims, and you are permanently barred from employment in financial services or any position involving access to other people's money. Brad's reaction to the sentence was a final demonstration of the narcissism and entitlement that had driven his criminal career. He stood up and addressed the judge directly, his voice carrying indignation rather than remorse. Your Honor, this investigation was biased from the beginning. That woman, he gestured toward me, seduced me into making statements that were taken out of context. This entire case is based on entrapment and prosecutorial misconduct. Judge Morrison's response was swift and decisive. Mr. Thompson, the evidence shows that you never knew Investigator Martinez's real identity, occupation, or purpose. You treated her exactly as you had treated previous employees at companies where you committed similar crimes. There was no seduction, no entrapment, and no misconduct. You were convicted based on your own actions and words, recorded during the commission of federal crimes. After the sentencing, I spent time with the victims who had traveled to Chicago to witness Brad's conviction. Their gratitude was overwhelming, but more importantly, their lives were being rebuilt. The FBI's asset recovery operation had succeeded in returning 98% of stolen funds, enabling people like Margaret Henderson to keep their homes and Robert Chen to complete his cancer treatment. Dorothy Palmer had become one of the most vocal advocates for elder financial protection in Illinois. She testified before the state legislature about the need for enhanced oversight of financial advisors and spoke at conferences about recognizing signs of employee identity theft. Her experience had transformed her from victim to educator, helping other elderly citizens protect themselves from similar predators. "Michelle," Dorothy said as we stood outside the courthouse, "I still can't believe you endured 3 months of that man's abuse to protect people like me. How did you find the strength to continue?" "Mrs. Palmer," I replied, "every time Brad tried to humiliate me, I thought about what would happen to you and the other victims if I gave up. That gave me all the strength I needed." 3 weeks later, I received my next assignment from the Federal Banking Commission, investigating a pharmaceutical company in Baltimore suspected of manipulating drug prices to defraud Medicare and Medicaid. Once again, I would create a cover identity, infiltrate a criminal organization, and gather evidence while enduring whatever psychological pressure the suspects could apply. My new identity was Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a recent pharmacy school graduate seeking entry-level employment with companies developing innovative treatment protocols. The backstory was carefully constructed: student loans requiring immediate repayment, family pressure to establish financial independence, and career ambitions that would make me appear grateful for any opportunity and reluctant to ask difficult questions. On my first day at Consolidated Pharmaceutical Solutions, I met my new supervisor, Director Kevin Walsh. He was younger than Brad, more sophisticated in his presentation, but I recognized the same pattern of behavior within minutes of our first conversation. The condescending tone, the assumptions about my capabilities, the subtle threats disguised as professional guidance. "Elena," Kevin said, as he showed me to a cramped workspace in the basement level of the building, "I want you to understand that pharmaceutical research requires absolute dedication and unquestioning compliance with established protocols. People who ask too many questions or share information inappropriately don't last long in this industry." I smiled meekly and thanked him for the opportunity, already activating the recording equipment concealed in my medical bag. Kevin Walsh had no idea that he was speaking to a federal investigator with expertise in pharmaceutical fraud and a perfect conviction record for cases involving Medicare manipulation. "I'm just grateful for the chance to learn," I replied, maintaining the character of someone desperate to prove herself worthy of permanent employment. "I promise I'll work hard and follow all procedures exactly." As I settled into my new undercover role, I reflected on the lessons learned from the Brad Thompson investigation. Every criminal who targets vulnerable people makes the same fundamental mistake. They assume that quiet, cooperative behavior indicates weakness rather than strength. They believe that someone who doesn't fight back immediately lacks the ability or courage to fight back effectively. Brad Thompson had spent 3 months trying to break my spirit and force me to quit, never realizing that every insult, every humiliation, and every attempt at intimidation was being documented as evidence for his eventual prosecution. Now Kevin Walsh would learn the same lesson as he attempted to manipulate and control someone he perceived as naive and powerless. The investigation into Consolidated Pharmaceutical would require months of careful evidence gathering, patient endurance of professional abuse, and the kind of psychological resilience that comes from knowing that justice delayed is not justice denied. Somewhere in Baltimore, elderly patients were being overcharged for medications they needed to survive, and Medicare fraud was costing taxpayers millions of dollars that could have been used to improve health care for vulnerable populations. But Kevin Walsh and his accomplices would discover, just as Brad Thompson had discovered, that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who appears to pose no threat at all. Sometimes justice comes from unexpected places, delivered by someone who has been systematically underestimated by people who mistake compassion for weakness and patience for surrender. As I began my new assignment, I carried with me the satisfaction of knowing that Brad Thompson would spend the next 12 years in federal prison while his victims rebuilt their lives with recovered funds and restored dignity. Dorothy Palmer's reputation had been completely cleared, Margaret Henderson had kept her house, and Robert Chen had successfully completed his cancer treatment. The work continued. The mission remained the same, and somewhere in Baltimore, pharmaceutical executives who thought they were too smart and too powerful to face consequences were about to learn that they had picked the wrong person to underestimate. Justice sometimes wears the disguise of vulnerability, speaks with the voice of submission, and strikes with the precision of someone who has been gathering evidence while appearing to absorb punishment. Brad Thompson learned that lesson too late. Kevin Walsh was about to begin his education. Call to action. Have you ever had to stay silent about something unfair happening around you while you worked toward a solution? How do you think you would handle being in a position where fighting back immediately might prevent you from helping other people in the long run? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think patience and strategic thinking are sometimes more powerful than direct confrontation? If this story resonated with you and reminded you that justice can come from unexpected places, please hit the like button to show your support. Subscribe to hear more stories about people who refuse to give up when facing seemingly impossible situations, and share this with someone who might need to remember that quiet strength can be just as powerful as loud resistance. Thank you for listening to Michelle's journey from apparent victim to triumphant investigator. Remember that sometimes the most meaningful victories require the longest preparation, and the people who seem powerless might actually be the ones holding all the cards. Until next time, never underestimate the quiet ones. They might be changing the world while you're not watching.